Hello everyone, how are you? Now in this video we're going to learn how to draw some feet. Now personally I don't really like drawing feet, it's probably my least favorite part in drawing, but like everything else, if you want to draw characters or people in general, it's something you gotta learn how to do. So first thing I find here is a circle, but wrong layer, I need a layer here. Okay. So a circle right here. Then for the main shape of the feet, we got a bit of a weird shape, like almost it's basically a rectangle, but with a diagonal line right there. So we do have a curve here, right? Just like the hands, when the palm of the hand finishes, we have that curve, and then we have fingers. With the feet it's the same thing. We have the main shape of the feet, then it ends, we have a curve, and then the toes right here. Alright, so these are more or less the shapes we have. Now we can add here some circles for the toes. These are the kind of shapes I like to use, circles. We are drawing a foot from the bottom at the moment, but we're going to see other perspectives of it. So these are our main shapes. So what do we want to do now? We want to find here some guidelines, so we know more or less the measurements or other proportions for each part of the foot. So that's what I'm going to do right now. So we have here one, right, and then we got another one right here. So we have a guideline for the bottom and for the top. Then we have another one just right here, another one here at this point. Finally we have this one where our rectangle ends, and another one for the rest of our circle. So for me, these are the guidelines that will help me know how big should I draw the foot, or what size will each part be. So now that we have this, I'm going to make some better guidelines here. So I basically copied the guidelines we just made in that sketch. Now I'm going to make them a bit horizontal, and then I'm going to clean this because they're obviously not very straight. So I'm going to very quickly make here some good looking guidelines. And now what we're going to do is recreate what we just did here on top of our reference, right? So I'm going to pick up my pencil here, and now I'm going to be looking at my guidelines here and trying to do the same thing. So I'm going to start with a circle. I think it's the part that it is easier to start with, but of course everyone has their own process. Maybe it's easier to start somewhere else, but for me I think it's easier to start from the bottom in this case. So we're going to start with a circle that we know goes from the bottom guideline to this third one. So circle here. Of course, this circle doesn't need to be perfect. As you can see, my circle is far from perfect. We're just drawing basic shapes here, just making a very simple sketch right now. So then we know we have this rectangular shape that goes from this guideline up until this one. So that's what we're going to be doing. So we got this one, another one here, and now we know that this here has a bit of a curve, right, that we talked about. So, and it goes to this other guideline that we haven't used yet. So let's make that curve right here, and now connect everything. There we go. So we already have here the main shapes for our foot. So all we are missing now is the toes. So for the toes, as I said, I'm going to use circles. Now we have something that we have another arch for the toes, right? That goes from this point up to this other guideline, or last guideline. So let's draw that arch, and there we go. So basically, if you want to simplify the shapes even more, this is what we have. We have the foot divided into three parts. We have a circle for the bottom, then more or less a rectangular shape, and then finally a weird, it looks like the fin of a shark for the toes. So we know what kind of shapes we want for our toes. Let's draw those circles. So we have one here for the biggest one, and then the other ones are pretty tame. So this is the basic shapes I would like to use, what I like to use to drawing feet. Now that we have this, it's time to go for a bit of a more detailed sketch. When we look at this, it does resemble a foot a little bit, right? But we want to go further than that. It's not exactly a foot right now. So let's go to the next step and refine this whole thing. So I'm going to go over here, add some transparency to this layer, add a new one on top, and now I'm going to use a darker color as well for my sketch. Now let's go over here to our image and take a look at it. So one thing you notice, for example, is that there is a curve here, right? The foot doesn't go straight down. We have here a little bit of a curve. And I think this is a very interesting shape that we have. And of course, you might want to stylize your feet a bit more, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But if we're going for something a tiny bit more realistic, of course, we're not going for a realistic style here, but I think this is a very interesting shape and that we should incorporate that in our sketch right here. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over here, make this curve, and then we go out again. We have one side of the foot, then we go down, we circle this up and then up again, and there we go. So on this side we don't have as much of a curve, and now we can start going for the toes. So we know that we have a very big toe right there, right? And then we have all the other smaller ones. Now, of course, while I'm doing this, I'm always looking for my reference just to guide me a little bit. I like to draw this line here of this curve. The smallest toe almost disappears, it's just a little nub that is there, so I like to just go over with a circle and that's it. So this is basically it for the shapes that I do like to use. Feel free to play with that. Some people don't have such an accentuated curve right here. Some feet go a bit straighter, some might be thinner, bigger or smaller. Some people have very long toes, for example, so do have some fun with that. So now that we have our more detailed sketch, it's time for us to go and draw our final lines. So now is the time that we're going to clean everything up and maybe even make some final modifications that we might feel that it needs. So I'm going to add some transparency here, and I am using Clip Studio. In Clip Studio, when I'm doing line art, I like to create a vector layer, which is this one right here, the second button in the last row here, but it's the vector layer option. And what this means is everything you're drawing in this layer is going to be in vector. If you decide to resize it, scale it up and down, you won't lose any quality to it. So I really like using vector layers for line art because I'll do a lot of edits on my line art as I go, and this way I'm sure I'm not going to lose any quality to my lines. So I really recommend that. So now I'm going to clean this up. I'm going to speed this up a bit so it's not too boring for you. The important part is the shapes and the more detailed sketch. Now I'm just going to go over all my sketch lines and just make something a little bit prettier. So I will see you in a few minutes. Okay, so here we go, my final foot seen from the bottom. I like to make these very squared shapes for the toes, but feel free to experiment with those. It can be a bit more circular. I think that fits, although I'm not a fan of drawing them, but I do think that they can have very interesting shapes and we can play a lot with them. And let's say you want to draw the foot from a top view, so instead of watching it from the bottom, so from below, you want to draw it on the other side. The good thing is it's the same kind of shape, so all you need is the exact shapes we have here. The only difference is when you're doing your final sketch or your more detailed sketch. So let's go over that. So one of the first things, and if you go and see some references of feet, is that this curve here from the bottom, we do have this curve very accentuated, right? But when we see it from The top, it's not that accentuated, so it goes a bit straighter. We have here this shape as well, and then it goes out again a little bit. And here, more or less here, is where the leg would be, right? Somewhere around here, and then it goes up, up, up. And we have the main part of the foot. Now, another difference is the toes. So from the bottom, we see mostly these round nubs, right? When we see a little bit of the rest and some of them, but not a lot. When we're drawing them from the front, it's going to be a bit different. We see a lot of this. So I'm going to draw some rectangles for each of the toe and then add circles to them. So if you've seen my tutorial on how to draw hands, you'll notice that I'll do something similar. I used rectangles and then kind of a bullet shape for the fingers. It's a bit similar here. So if you want to learn how to draw some hands, you can check that video out if you're interested. But for now, this is it. So instead of some bullet shapes, we draw some circles on top of those rectangles. And there we go. We have here our foot from the top. So now that we have this, we can go in and draw our final lines. Now, you might notice that there's something missing here, right? But we'll talk about it when doing those final lines. So let's start doing them. Now, things that we can add to our feet here. Nails. Nails are something that are very important to the feet when drawing them from the top. We do have our nails showing up, and usually toenails are a bit more rectangular, so I like to draw them that way. I like to draw them a bit curver when it's for the hands, but in the feet, if you do look at them, they tend to be a bit more squared. So let's have some fun with that. And then finally, we can add here some hair. Why don't we add some hair to our feet? These are some details that you can add to add a little something, or instead of hair, you can just add here those lines where the toes bend, you know, like here, they bend a little bit. That's why we see those little knobs on the other side. And this is basically it. So starting with a set of shapes, so if we don't count with the circles for the toes, it's 3 shapes. We can draw the feet in 2 different positions. Now the other one I want to talk about is from the side, because we use very different shapes for that. So let's take a look at that. Again, I do have here a reference, and we're going to be looking for some shapes. So let's do this all again. It's the same process that we did before. So a new layer on top, I'm grabbing my red here and my pencil, and we're going to start finding shapes. So first shape is again a circle right here. Then I like to go over here and we have a rectangle. So we have part of our foot. Then we have an oblique shape just like this. And then another one. And finally a circle. These are the shapes I like to use. So now that we have this, we want to go in and find the guidelines, right? Just like we did before. So we got one right here and one at the bottom. Next one is going to be here where this shape starts, another one here, and finally another for where our toe is. So this guideline is actually really helpful because it goes for our toe and this line right here. So with this I can already know my measurements and proportions. So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to replicate them so you don't see all these extra lines in it and points. Just like we did before, we're going to replicate this shape. So I'm going to start with a circle that starts right here, right? How tall the circle is, at least for me, doesn't really matter. What I want is this curve right here. So something like this is more than enough. Then we got from here, we got our rectangle from this guideline here. I was doing it wrong. See, that's why it's good to have the reference side by side so we don't make any mistakes. Rectangle, there we go. This shape going down goes a bit below this guideline, and then it touches this one, it connects right here. And then we have another shape. This one goes right here, touches our last guideline here, and then the circle. So here we have the shapes. These are very weird shapes, but when we do our last sketch, it's going to make so much better sense. And of course, these are the shapes that I find, but there's so many shapes that we can find in here. So feel free to just get a bunch of references and just draw some shapes on top of them and see what better works for you. This is really important because what works for me might not work for you, and there's really no wrong way to go about it. You might find maybe it's going to be all about circles, or the way you organize the shapes are going to be different, and that's totally fine. That's why that experimenting these things in this phase is so important, because this is going to be the base of your drawings. These are the shapes that you're going to be memorizing, and it's important that they work for you, they make sense for you. So experiment as much as you can. This is just an example. It doesn't mean that you can't find another one. Maybe you'll find other shapes, so have fun with it. And with that, I'm going to go over here, create a new layer on top, a darker color, and now I'm going to work on my sketch. So we have here the bit of our leg, we have here a curve, it goes down. Let me just hide this one very quickly so you can see our reference. It goes down here, and then we have our toe. I think feet looks so weird from the side. And of course, people have different looking feet, so you might find other different, the shape of the toe might be a little bit different. Take a look at your own feet and use them as reference. That can be really helpful. We have here a little bit of a curve, right? And here as well, we have this curve happening right here, and we want to use that. So there we go. Now we can also go over here and add a little bit of nail. And this is mostly it. So now that we have our sketch, we can go in and draw our final lines. So giving some transparency here, a new layer on top, grab my brush, and now just go over these lines. Alright, so here we have it. Let's put everything side by side. We have here the feet drawn in 3 different positions. So we have from the bottom, from the top, and finally from the side. As you can see, you can do it with very simple shapes. I like to draw my feet very simplified because I think that looks better with my style, with the style I use. If you want to learn how to draw a full cartoon body, do check out this video. I have a full tutorial on that, and as always, keep on drawing.